Welcome to Time to Talk with Edgbaston NNS. Today we're going to explore the emotional landscape that carers face, especially the often unseen grief that accompanies the journey through dementia.
So whether you're a carer yourself or simply someone trying to understand this journey more deeply, this conversation is for you. I'd like to welcome our two guest speakers, Suzanne McArthur from Thriving Connection CIC and Ruth from Amba Care Solutions CIC.
Hey guys, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi there, I'm Ruth, and as Faraza said, I'm from Amba Care Solutions, and I'm the Health, Wellbeing and Dementia Services Specialist. A lot of the time I spend my day doing is around supporting people who are living with dementia, so whether that's people with dementia or their caregivers as well, supporting them in whatever way that I can.
Brilliant, thank you. And Suzanne?
I'm Suzanne McArthur from Thriving Connection CIC, and the work that I focus on is around normalising conversations about end-of-life care planning and normalising conversations about grief and the connection with dementia. So the connection of my work with dementia is raising awareness around the journey of grief for caregivers of people living with dementia, because it's one of those conversations that's not really had.
So in your view, what are the most under-recognized aspects of a carer's role when supporting someone with dementia?
Since I've met Suzanne and been working with her, I have to say that I've had a sudden light bulb moment in recognising that some of the things I was helping people to deal with were actually coming from a place where they were experiencing grief. That loss that they were experiencing before somebody had died, and I wasn't given enough recognition to that. So I'm very pleased to have been able to meet Suzanne and to be a part of this work.
You're too kind, Ruth. Too kind.
So how do you see the emotional and psychological demands of caregiving change across the different stages of dementia? Is that something that you've noticed quite often?
So I think from I'll focus on the grief aspects of the journey. The anticipatory grief that people experience at the beginning of the journey of dementia, when somebody's first diagnosed with it, both parties will experience that grief. And you've got the individual living with dementia that will be experiencing the loss of future plans and dreams that they were aspiring to. And as a caregiver, they'll be experiencing those similar losses of dreams that we're going to be sharing with their loved one. They'll also be having that anxiety as well about future care roles and how their roles will change. But I think the important thing is both of those parties probably can share those experiences together. Obviously, as dementia progresses and the cognitive ability of the individual declines, and perhaps the communication skills, some of those conversations are going to be more difficult. So that journey of grief becomes a lot more isolating for the caregiver. And they'll be experiencing a lot more losses as that journey of dementia continues. So it could be the loss of, the identity of their loved one, their personality changes, could be having behaviours that are difficult to manage that weren't there before, loss of roles. So it could be a wife that is now losing the intimacy side of the relationship and is becoming much more of a formal caregiver. And friendship circles reduce, as we know, as, people become more advanced in their dementia state, their circles of support reduce. So you've got those losses of friendships as well. So I'd say there's that element of, you can share those conversations perhaps more in the early stages of grief, but as dementia progresses, that grief becomes a lot more isolating for the caregiver.
Okay. If I could just pick up on that as well from the perspective of somebody supporting people living with some dementia, both the person with dementia and their caregiver, that it's important to remember that dementia is progressive.
Yeah.
So that things are going to get worse over time. And as they get worse, then the demands on the carer become greater as well, and those emotional demands as well. And then there comes all these feelings about their emotions taking over. So maybe they're getting a bit angry or they're getting frustrated. And it's important to remind them that is part of the grief process, that that's something that's normal, and then doing something to help them to actually address those issues.
I think that's the really important part, isn't it? Because people will experience anger and frustration, even resent, but then people will start to feel guilty about having those feelings. And I think because we don't talk about grief and loss openly in society, people aren't recognising, caregivers aren't recognising that actually this is just normal part of the journey of grief. And knowing that actually this is normal, it gives us permission to feel those things and not feel guilty about having them.
Yeah.
And I think as well, people get tired as it goes on, and then that makes it more difficult to control your emotions and to deal with situations. And it's, I think sometimes people think it's something that they've got to do, that it's their responsibility. And they've always said that they're going to look after them. So helping them to realise that you're just as important. You've got to look after yourselves, because if you don't look after yourself, you're not going to be able to look after your loved one that you're actually caring for, and just helping them to see that. And then the practical aspects of saying, well, maybe you could ask another family member to do some of that, or to go and look for something more official, daycare, just going to social groups, or sometimes it has to be a couple of weeks of respite, just to recharge your batteries and to know that it's okay to
Not feel guilty about it. Yeah.
I think you already addressed the next question about the consequences of prolonged caregiving on a grief process. But how might this unresolved grief in care manifest in ways that professionals should be aware of?
I think it's a good point to raise, because, as I said, it was a light bulb moment for me, realising the impact that grief can have on people. And it's something I don't think that all professionals, even people who are working in the field of dementia, take enough account of, and just much more concentrate on those. Yes, behaviours do change, but not thinking about what impact is that going to have on the carer when they see. And I think a really good example that upsets a lot of carers is when their loved one looks at them and you can tell that they don't really recognise them, and they think when the son walks into the room that that's their husband. And being able to explain to the carer that, no, they haven't forgotten you, but what's happened is something that's called time shifting. They've gone back into a period of time when you look like what your son looks like. And it's that reality for them at that moment. So to be able to, it's about the understanding. Why is it happening? And I think that that's what professionals need to be able to support carers with.
And if I can just follow up on that, something you mentioned at the beginning, like before you met Suzanne, that there were some aspects you didn't realize was actually grief. Would you be able to expand on that?
I think I'm as much to blame as a lot of professionals, that it was just, I thought I had to get the message across about helping people to understand why it was happening. And now I'm much more thinking about, and what impact is that going to have on a carer, where they're feeling that loss. They don't know me anymore. I've lost them. That's my partner. We've been together for 50 years or whatever. And now they don't want to know me. So it's explaining why it's happening, but then supporting them through that and helping them to recognise that that's normal for them to feel those, because they could feel really angry about it, sad, all sorts of feelings that could come into it, but actually recognising those and helping them to recognise it's normal.
And I think the difficulty is if professionals, going back to your original question, if professionals don't identify that grief is a big component of the caregiver's journey, those emotions go unaddressed. And then you've got that compounded effect of, as we know, with the journey of dementia, multiple losses over periods of time. If that's not being recognised and supported, you've then got a huge impact on people's mental health and well-being. So people will have increased, or could, should I say, have increased anxiety. They could have depression, become more isolated. So it's really important for people to understand as Ruth has quite clearly put and eloquently put, that emotional impact of that progressive.
And how those emotions manifest in different ways. Where you have previously spoken to us about, it can be anger, it can be frustration, it's just not being sad.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also important because we're sounding where we sound quite negative about those emotions associated with the journey of a caregiver. You've also got the positive emotions of being a caregiver, the joy that you see of knowing that actually you are providing that love and care and you're doing a good job. You know, you have got those moments of kindness that you can see and moments of gratitude. You know, there are lots of elements where, caregivers get joy out of their role, not just obviously all the negatives. So I just wanted to make sure that was coming across as well.
I think it's important for that to be picked up as well, to encourage people and to remind them what a good job that they're doing and that the love that they're showing to the person. And that we all have bad days.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
it's good to be able to acknowledge that.
Yes, and I think that's where peer support comes in. You know, the importance of carers not being isolated and thinking that they're on their own. I think the number of people, and this is, obviously we're focusing on, anticipatory grief, but just to be able to share your experiences and your emotions with other people that are going through something similar or have been through something similar, for them to validate that and say, actually, that's normal. I felt like that and it's okay. Just gives so much more reassurance that you're not on your own, that you're not losing your mind, that you're thinking, actually, I'm doing a good job and this is why I'm thinking this. And today is a bad day, but tomorrow it could be better.
I think that's a really good point. And one of the sessions that I run in Coventry, actually, is 2 hours, call it meaningful moments, when there's activities for people living with dementia. But in the very middle of that, from 11:15 to 12:15, the carers can go off into another room and they know that if their loved one needs them, they can get called back to that. But that's respite. That's a chance to have some time with other people who are going through a very similar situation, where they can share those experiences, where they can offload and be open. They built our relationship, so they can be quite open about, the other day it was really difficult and I did lose my temper. But I've learned how I'm going to deal with that the next time that it happens. And just sharing that, and just that 1 hour to themselves, when they know that their loved one is safe and is doing things that are going to keep them occupied as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They find strength. They harm each other.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think you kind of answered this in that, but what kind of support would you say makes the biggest difference for carers that are going through this sort of thing? And what kind of helps them the best with the stress and grief that they might be dealing with?
I think for me, the biggest thing is actually acknowledging that anticipatory grief does exist. Before you even move on to what sort of support you can actually give somebody. And it's good to get different for everybody, because I think that there's no one answer fits all. So you can't go to a rule book or a guidebook and find the answers to what do I do if, because everybody is different and you have to find your own solutions. But that's when peer support comes in, where you're able to discuss those things. And one person will say, well, I tried this, and somebody else will say, I tried this other thing because that didn't work for me. And then come to your own conclusion. It's trial and error.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there about it being individual. You've got your individual actions of how to support somebody through the practical steps. But I think it's also important to highlight that grief is a very individual journey as well. So it could be that somebody has had a similar experience. They've said the practical elements of how they've dealt with it, but actually the emotional side of it could be extremely different for two people as well. So it's being aware of, grief being a very individual journey as well.
And I think that's the point. We do help people through the physical way. The way that somebody is behaving or why they behave in that way. And was to get about the emotional impact that's going to get on a carer. I think that's a little bit.
It's the bit that's missing, isn't it?
And has to be addressed.
So how would you support them with that journey of resilience as well as well-being?
So I think there's several steps. You've got that important first step of being prepared. All the sessions that Ruth runs and other organisations run about helping people understand what dementia entails, the different types of dementia, the behaviours that you might see, common symptoms, that educational bit, being prepared for what your journey as a carer may entail. I think it's about then knowing what support services are out there that you can access and finding your local peer, building your circles of support, your informal circles of support. So who are your friends that you know that you can rely upon, perhaps to give you a little bit of respite, or who you can phone when you're feeling really low and you just need to talk to somebody and share your thoughts and feelings without being judged. You've got your peer support groups, your local support groups, who to connect with there. Like Ruth said, the importance of having that space where you can talk to people who've gone through similar experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also, I think this becomes more difficult as dementia progresses, is about having time for yourself. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I think for me, I'm all for, find time for yourself, have some time for some mindfulness where you can reset your batteries, do something for you. But actually the reality is that that's probably going to be more difficult to find as time progresses, because the demands of being a carer are going to increase and increase. I don't know what your thoughts are, Ruth.
And I think that's something that if you can introduce those thoughts around sort of self-care, looking after yourself at a very early point in the dementia, then it becomes second nature, doesn't it? So it's something that you can do, and it's easier to actually build on that and maintain that as she goes through. And I think just picking up on in this point, you were talking around support and having that circle of support. I think also there comes the time when you need professional support and being able to recognise that actually this is all just too much for me.
Yeah.
And this sort of relates to people feeling really anxious. They could be depressed as well. And recognising that if that's how you're feeling for 2 to 3 weeks or more, then you really need to get to the doctor, maybe have some talking therapies, that sort of thing, and not be ashamed of that.
Yeah.
And I think that all leads into the anxiety and the stigma and the shame around acknowledging that you've got a mental health problem, that you do need some help with your psychological welfare as well.
And you've got, there's admirable nurses. You've got that group of professionals out there that are specialists with dementia who can also signpost you to other services. You've got your social prescribers. So if you go to the GP and they can then refer you on to your social prescribers, they'll have all of those local support groups and, like you said, talking therapies, lots of complementary therapies, lots of different things that might help support you at your most difficult and vulnerable times.
I think it's about preparing people what might be coming down the road. So not scaremongering, but actually sort of laying out, this is what could happen.
Yeah.
And, even to the point of when it does become too much, you do need to seek help for yourself.
I think
this is where you go for.
Yeah, I think that leads us nicely on to the next question about how health and social care systems can better integrate grief support into dementia care planning. I know you talked about nurses and all the other support systems, but how could you better integrate it into the care planning? Are people accessing those now?
I think at the moment it's not being recognised, as Ruth said right at the beginning. Healthcare and social care professionals aren't recognising anticipatory grief as being a symptom of being a caregiver, any caregiver, but obviously we're talking about caregiver and dementia here. And it's not being recognised, so actually it's not being introduced into care plans.
And the impact of it is
yeah.
just not being acknowledged. It's just been seen as some advice around how do you deal with it.
Yeah. So so a caregiver goes into to see the GP, absolutely exhausted, in tears, feeling anxious and depressed. The first thing they'll think is, right, we need to get you some supporting. They're not looking at, okay, well, that's the practical element, but okay, what are we going to do for you around this anticipatory grief? Because this is what you're dealing with. And how can we support you to understand what you're going through and look at your support mechanisms? It's just not being recognised.
Both things are important.
They need to go hand in hand, don't they?
So somebody goes in and they say they're really struggling, so it's right to make a referral.
Oh, yeah,
to
100%.
or
Yeah.
whatever, but you can't leave it at that.
No.
You've got to then, so that's dealing with what the person with dementia needs, but then you need to step across and look at, but what do you need?
Yeah.
So we'll get the caring for your loved one, but what is it that you need to be able to carry on?
And that doesn't mean it's got to be medication.
So do you think there needs to be more awareness for, say, social care teams or GP practices, social prescribers around anticipatory grief?
I think grief full stop, if I'm honest. Across the board, yeah. Definitely 100%.
So following on from what you just said, where do you think we are failing carers, especially when it comes to grief support? What are the barriers and where are we failing?
I think there's lots of barriers to different communities talking about grief and loss. And I think you've got cultural barriers of where, different cultural beliefs and faiths have got different views of what grief looks like. Some cultures will have a specific view of how people should grieve and rituals around grief and how the community should support them. You've got barriers about shame that is associated with different illnesses. There will be some communities that don't acknowledge that dementia exists and will hide that person away. So then obviously being able to manage the grief associated with that is going to be totally different to somebody where dementia is openly supported by the community and that caregiver can be supported.
Can I just come in on that? Because I think that there is a lot of work, as Suzanne was referring to, around the fact that within some communities, dementia is not recognised. So it's almost doing that piece of work about raising awareness and helping people to understand that it's not because there's something that somebody's done bad in a previous life. So it's not karma, and it's not because they're mad and are possessed with evil spirits or whatever, but that it's there because somebody, for whatever reason, has damage or injury to their brain that's stopping it from working properly. So having those conversations to actually normalise dementia and the way that it presents before you could even start to talk about your reaction to that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. You've got a double-edged sword. You've got two barriers. You've got two gates that you've got to walk through before you can even start the conversation. Like I say, you've got that barrier around talking about dementia and acknowledging what it is. And then you've got you've gone over that hurdle, and then you've got the barrier about talking about grief that as a society we don't like to talk about anyway.
Yeah.
So you've got, it's a hard one.
And I think as well, it's looking at who's going to have those conversations with people in those communities, because there's often issues around trust.
Yeah.
So finding people within the communities who are trusted that can actually start those conversations where it's recognised that what they have to say is valid.
Yes.
And it's not people coming in to try and change the way that they see it totally, but working within that context.
Yeah,
with the community.
So what would a truly grief-informed approach to dementia care look like?
So as Ruth clearly put earlier, at the moment, a lot of the education around dementia is around the symptoms, the practical help, and how to address some of those changes. We need to be introducing the emotional impact of that, and introducing the journey of grief really early on to both the public and to professionals. At the moment, that I don't see that happening a lot. It will happen some places, don't get me wrong, but it's not the norm. And I think part of that education package has got to be around the resources of where people can go to at those certain stages of that journey, and helping people to understand that those experiences and those emotions are normal, but also how they can travel that journey of grief with their loved one. So actually I'm going to say it isn't isolating. So giving people ideas of how to cope with those multiple losses as they go.
Yeah.
So it could be looking at old photographs and putting a compilation book together of their favourite photographs and having those conversations about that, listening to favourite music and then starting those conversations and talking about your memories, all those sorts of things. I think so there's the element of education. Then I think there's the element of what good support looks like, of that starting with the grassroots support of your support groups and your peer support groups, looking at, WhatsApp groups. So those people that can't get out of the house, they've got those WhatsApp groups of support that they can contact people at any time. There's online forums. But actually, and then moving on to obviously your level 2s where you've got your talking therapies, that those people who are providing talking therapies are educated about dementia, because at the moment they'll be talking, they'll be educated about grief, but they won't be educated about the dementia aspect. So how the two link. And then obviously you've got your counsellors, but again, they'd be thinking about the grief, but probably wouldn't be educated about the dementia. So I suppose where I'm getting at is, at the moment we work in silos.
Yeah.
You've got your dementia educators and your dementia specialists. You've got your grief educators and your grief specialists, and they're not coming together at the moment. What good care looks like is those merging and working in partnership with each other to make a really good educational and support mechanism.
I think it's about people actually understanding that grief, anticipatory grief, is a part of a caregiver's life.
Yeah.
That normalising it, I think that's the bit really, and making that connection, as Suzanne said. You can't just think about, well, these are the behaviours that could present, that are common with somebody in dementia, might appear at different stages, might not appear at all, alongside and what impact is that going to have on you as a carer? And those feelings then of loss and everything that comes with anticipatory grief around that, feeling hungry and frustrated, all those sort of things. So bringing the two together, just for people like me who suddenly should have a light bulb moment that says it's not just about the theory, it's not just about learning what you can do to manage behaviours, it's the understanding of the impact that those have on somebody, and what impact does, whenever you feel that loss or whatever that might be, just simply that somebody can't do what they did last week. That in your mind it must be, well, that's just another step, another downward step, but being able to recognise that, what do you do about it? How can you actually deal with that? And that it is normal to feel those feelings and emotion.
And it is a loss.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it's anticipating that all this is going to happen and put something in place ahead.
About being prepared.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think that is the main thing, is be prepared. And don't be frightened, because I think people don't want to look ahead as to what it might be. But I think it's really important to learn what could happen. It might not happen, but just to be prepared in case that it does, so that you know how you're going to be able to cope with that.
And know what resources are out there ready. Because the reality is, when you are at your most vulnerable time, you will not have the brain space or the capacity to be able to then search for the resources that you need. If you're prepared and you've had that education, that awareness about, what support is out there, you can just go to it or at least go to somebody who can then help you find it. You've not got to be doing all that searching when you've A, not got the time, B, got the brain space, and C, actually, mentally, you're not in the right frame of mind.
Absolutely.
I think it's important as well to have those open conversations with, say, the person that you're caring for, and with the wider family as well, because something that did just occur to me that I seem to have probably misunderstood, that you can have behaved in a particular way. Quite often people will say to me, well, my sister, she just doesn't have any part in the care at all. She doesn't want anything to do with my dad.
Yeah.
She won't help me at all. And, you know, it just occurred to me that could be that sister experiencing that anticipatory great grief. I'm thinking, I'm just going to stand back because I don't want to face it.
Yeah.
And so that is just something else that actually made me realise that you need to sit down and really think through why is somebody behaving in a particular way, and don't make judgments about people, and have those open conversations.
So what has it been, you being out there working with these people? What are their experiences of caregiving and grief?
I only hear snippets. When I talk to community groups about grief and loss, a lot of them will have those light bulb moments of actually, this is what I've been experiencing. Their journeys, the majority of their journeys, they've felt that they have been really isolated on their own with their journeys of being a caregiver of somebody with dementia, that their friends and social networks over time have got smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're becoming more lonely and I'd say desperate. They find it hard to navigate systems. You know, let's be honest, systems aren't easy to navigate in England. So not knowing where to go. We've got a lot of stuff online and resources online, and there is still a cohort of people out there that are not IT literate and do not use online resources, or have managed to get online but actually then can't navigate the websites because they're not all that easy. So I think there's a lot of people out there, a lot of caregivers that find the journey a lot more difficult and challenging than it needs to be. Not because of their caregiver role, but because as a society, we're not there. We're not there for them.
Sadly, a lot of people are asked to use the telephone, and that's where they get the support from. And the number of people who said to me, Ruth, it makes such a difference that you're sitting down and you're talking to me, and it's around that. You can actually pick up on what people are seeing, and you can't do that over the telephone. So being able to pick up on those emotions that people are displaying, and actually to do something about it.
So, Ruth and Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really insightful to listen to all the work that you do. If you'd like to learn more about Suzanne and Ruth's work or access resources for carers and families affected by dementia, then check out the links in our show's notes.